Hello, everybody. Welcome back to OneTAKE Live, the show where we discuss the future of work, life, and culture with visionaries, entrepreneurs, academics, game changers. I am your host, Ian Barkin. And if this is your first OneTAKE Live, thank you for joining us. Welcome. The way we do it here is please do in the comment section share your name, share the location from which you're joining. And also, if you like the show, do check out the prior shows that are available in various different formats. One is you can find them on Citrix.com/OneTAKE, Citrix.com/OneTAKE. Or you can also find the audio versions that are available on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Podbean, and iTunes. So the audio is out there for you as well. So I would welcome you to check that out. So as I said, we discuss future of work, life, and culture here. I'm very excited for this show because we're going to touch on actually not virtually, we're going to touch on every one of those topics with my next guest. So without further ado, I will welcome him to the show. Martin Mrugal, welcome to OneTAKE.
Thanks, Ian. Great to be here.
It is great to have you. So Marty, I said this to you. I'm not sure this is proper interviewer decorum when you tell a guest that they're very difficult to have on the show because they've done so many very interesting things. So where the heck do you go in the discussion? But I did share that with you. And I'm excited to try to cover them all in the time we have. You're the Chief Customer Innovation Officer at Citrix. True?
Yep, that's right.
Very good. But you've had a long and illustrious career before you got there, and you started at Citrix only maybe 6 months ago. So I want to back us up to the beginning, to the making of Marty, and hear a little bit about sort of what you went to school for, what you thought you wanted to do. And then I want to delve into the first company where you worked for some years, but I'll let you get there, and then we'll delve into that. So, tell us who is Martin Mrugal?
Sure. So let's see, where do I start? So, I always had a vision of being an engineer. Electronics, electrical engineering. I was really mechanical. When I was a kid, actually, when I was very young, my mother told the story the other day that when my aunt would babysit me while my mother worked, and they gave me a clock, and I would take it apart and put it back together almost every day. I have a feeling that's where my mechanical skills came from. But I had this vision of being an engineer. So in high school, I actually went to an electronics school at night, got an associate's degree, and then I figured I'd go to school and become an electrical engineer. And in my freshman year, I went to Penn State. At my freshman year at Penn State, I had this course called EG50. And EG50 was all about mechanical drawing and design. And Ian, I couldn't draw a three-dimensional object to save my life. And so that was the first hint that maybe I'm not cut out for engineering. I'm not sure. I mean, engineers don't always have to draw per se, but as I went on, I started taking some other classes, and I remember my sophomore year, I called my father and I was like, "Dad, there's no way I don't want to be an engineer anymore." And my father was shocked, my mother was shocked. So my father's like, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Maybe I'm going to try accounting." And my father laughed so hard that I almost had to put down the phone because he was a CPA, and he was thinking to himself, "There's no way this kid's going to go be an accountant. There's just no way."
That's very
so he said, "Call me after managerial, accounting and financial accounting. After you take your first 2 intro courses and tell me how you like it." I called him back and I was like, "Dad, how could you stand to be an accountant? I can't stand it." So he was like, "Yeah," and no offense to accountants out there, by the way. It just wasn't for me. So I eventually, took a bunch of different business classes. I went undeclared, took a bunch of business classes, and I liked like several. It was really hard for me to choose. I love sales and marketing. And the sales and marketing classes, there was a professor there who came from IBM who just kind of opened my eyes to like technical sales. There were business logistics classes. Now we call it supply chain, but back then it was business logistics. And there was a professor that was actually known throughout all universities as being one of the thought leaders in supply chain.
Interesting.
And then I loved economics. I loved micro and macroeconomics. So I took classes in all of them. I had just about enough credits to graduate. I had a minor in economics. I majored in marketing, but I had almost enough credits for business logistics as well. So that was kind of the making of me per se.
Making of you, and a bonus, we've offended accountants the world over. So that's outstanding.
Yes.
Check, done that. So then you go work for a company called Conrail.
Yeah.
Which everyone listening will, of course, remember was, and this I only know because I looked it up before we talked here, but Consolidated Rail Corporation, put together in the 70s because railroad companies were coming on hard times because of disruption, because of innovation. And one of those innovations was the fact that airlines were on the scene. So all of this, the shipment was heading into the cloud. Foreshadowing. And so because of the cloud, Conrail became a company, and then you were at Conrail for quite a while, playing various different roles. So to talk to us about what you did at Conrail.
Yeah. So actually, it was kind of happenstance. Conrail was one of the recruiters at Penn State, and so they recruited me because of all the business logistics courses I had. And I had a choice. I had a couple of offers, but what intrigued me about Conrail was a lot of the especially in the sales area, their employees were older and retiring, and there was a huge opportunity to move up the chain in a relatively short period of time.
Okay.
So I started as a sales trainee, and then a territory rep, and then an account executive. And what was really cool to me was I got a chance. My first position was in Pittsburgh, and I got a chance to see steel mills, Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel, Weirton Steel, U.S. Steel. I got a chance to go into automotive companies. I got a chance to just see industry, and I just fell in love with industry. And I got to see how the quote unquote sausage is being made in a variety of different industries, and I just loved it. I just ate it up.
That's
so. I had a bunch of different roles there. I went from sales to kind of a marketing role where we built these transfer terminals where we would take bulk material in and then ship it out to final destination by truck.
Okay.
I was in their intermodal department for these double stack containers for a while, and then I toward the end, I was in the automotive group, and we were redesigning the way, especially the big three, but also the foreign-based domestic automotive manufacturers were shipping vehicles, both across the United States and to destination markets, across the world. So export facilities, things like that. So it was a great experience. I loved the company. We had announced the merger of equals, and then ultimately the two other railroads in the East started competing and bidding up the price of Conrail. I think it went from like $33 a share to $111. And eventually they agreed to stop the madness and split Conrail up. And that was an opportunity for me to maybe do something else.
Well, okay. So there's a lot of, I suppose, career and industry transformation foreshadowing and very much of those stories as far as seeing how the sausage was made, collaborating with your clients, with the automotive companies on how best to ship and distribute. I am certain we're going to come back to that. So that takes us to the next chapter in your career, which was at SAP. So you went from an industry I always equate as sort of as an image of America as you drive across the country and see big trains hauling lots of stuff far distances, to a German software firm that is really the underpinning of so much of how business runs today. You held various different roles at SAP. Walk us through them, and then we've got the most recent role you held, and then again, as we talked about, I don't want to focus too much on your prior job because you've got a new one and you're doing some really cool stuff there too. But walk us through the SAP years.
Yeah, so a lot of folks ask, like, how did you go from like the railroad industry to the technology industry, right?
Yeah.
And because I had all that experience, and I basically had an opportunity to go with either of the acquisition companies, and I just said, you know what, this is a great launching off point.
Right.
And at the time, SAP was starting to think about going to market by industry, and they were looking for someone that had financial experience. And I just finished my MBA
Hmm.
with a finance background. So my father, had some influence there anyway. And then because I had a finance background and I had all this experience in the automotive industry, they were looking for people with both of those combinations that could walk in to a C-suite and basically help them write the business case to justify a multi-million-dollar purchase of SAP.
Okay.
So it was great because I used all the background that I had at Conrail, and I had to do a lot of capital asset planning and a lot of return on investment and net present value when we were bidding, basically traffic with the automotive suppliers, et cetera. So I had that. And so it was a relatively smooth transition, except I didn't know SAP.
Right.
But when you're basically in charge of writing a business case with your customer that's going to go to the board for a capital allocation, you learn it pretty quickly.
Right.
So you have to basically take the business process, the existing process, and the to-be process, understand the value, the business outcomes you're going to generate, and then put a value against them and write the case. So that's how I started. And then I moved into industries. So I was responsible for the manufacturing industries, probably no shock,
Mhm.
in North America for SAP. I also ran pre-sales. I was a solution architect for a while. And then in 2006, I actually had the opportunity to launch our first software as a service product called Business by Design. I did that for a couple of years, and it wasn't the smoothest launch from a product perspective. And I was pretty vocal about what was going on in some of our product development processes. So I did an internal project for 2 years. And I never forget the board member who called me and wanted me to be the field representative. They put a guy from the field and a guy from development together, and they said, all right, you guys figure this out.
Okay.
So we literally dissected, how we go from an idea to the first customer installing the product. And we dissected the whole thing. So it was a great opportunity to understand how we create the software across the different functions within a large enterprise software company. So that was cool. Then I ran manufacturing globally for SAP. I had all the process, discrete, and consumer packaged good manufacturing sectors. From there, I also when we started making some acquisitions, when we realized we were late to the cloud, we created a cloud strategy, and I was working for our chief strategy officer, who kind of laid out exactly what we needed to do to become relevant to cloud. And we started making all these acquisitions, ultimately accumulating in over $40 billion of acquisitions over 10 years. So I was the COO for one of those acquisitions called Ariba, which is a procurement software. And then I was the COO for all of our industry solutions. I was the chief innovation officer for North America for about 2 years. And then I moved into a role of basically the head of customer success globally for SAP. And in that role, I was combining all of our different acquisitions. A lot of the software as a service acquisitions had customer success organizations, but they were all run independently.
Right.
So my charter was to bring those together and really focus the company on customer success and customer experience.
Tremendous career, and the airplanes taking freight into the air, cloud foreshadowing came to pass. You created cloud capabilities. Was there a moment, or was it just a culmination of everything you'd done up to that point that was the catalyst for your own pivot and focus on experience and customers? Because I imagine, as you described, where you were taking that one product launch, you atomized down how you went about developing the product and trying to ascertain why it went well or didn't go well. That's somewhat internal still to some degree. How did we come up with this idea? How did engineering get involved? How did we develop it, go to market with it? So what point was that epiphany of customer success and customer focus sort of the most memorable for you?
I think it started with the product launch of the first SaaS application, even back in 2006.
Okay.
And maybe even prior to that, Ian, because I some of my roles I carried a quota, but many roles I didn't. I was kind of I was like the industry advisory practice, where I led industry advisory practices. I also led our value advisory practices. And in those roles, I got a chance to see kind of what customers valued, and why they valued it. And one of the points of frustration for me was we were constantly pushing product, without really taking into account what does the customer really want and need, what are their business outcomes. Part of that is kind of value engineering the business case, but it goes beyond that. It goes to customer satisfaction. And so as I started to see where SAP was going in terms of transitioning to the cloud, it became extremely, it was just eye-opening that you're only going to maintain a subscription if you keep that customer satisfied throughout the life cycle.
Right.
No longer do we have the convenience of selling software up front and then walking away and letting a partner implement it.
Right.
Now we are on the hook for customer satisfaction as much as our partners or anyone else is. Mm-hmm. And that really hit home to me as we started making these acquisitions to the cloud. It became paramount that some of the acquisitions had great customer success focus, other ones didn't. We had some software as a service solutions that had no customer success resources, right? So bringing all that together, I was so passionate about it that it just made sense. And the woman I was working for, Jen Morgan in North America, became our CEO, our co-CEO.
Okay.
And when she became the co-CEO, she was tired of listening to me, but they basically made a decision that we were going to bring all these things together, and I interviewed and got the role.
Nice. So just tenacity and consistency. Well, and so there's a few things that brings up. One is you need strong customer success and support if there's an environment where there's alternatives. Right? If you've got the only rail track that gets you from point A to point B, and how nice do you necessarily need to be? But as markets became more crowded too, you needed to hold on to those customers because they had options. And it's, as you said, it's how interesting to see, really quite starkly, because quite a bit of light was shown on it, that you saw various different examples from no customer success team at all, which may or may not have manifested in a particular customer experience, to ones that are quite a bit more high touch. How did you find the healthy level? Was it everybody had to move to the side of the scale that was high touch, or was there a middle ground, or were there parameters that helped you sort of determine what good customer success needed to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And because we had a portfolio of cloud solutions, and I never forget the first leadership meeting, we had each of the products that did have customer success groups. We had them present, and it was clear from that very first meeting that some of them had really good best practices. And so we worked as a leadership team. It wasn't me. It was the leadership team that kind of came together. We used design thinking, and we basically said, okay, how do we bring this together? How do we kind of make a minimum viable customer success product, and then build on it from there and leverage all of the best practices across the different groups. Yeah. Right? Some of the groups started thinking about how do we do metering better. Other groups actually had metering technology so they could see where customers were struggling with adoption. Other groups had really good onboarding practices, right? And they had videos and short videos, and it made it very seamless. Other groups had activation services to make sure that 25% of the entitlement that the customer purchased was going to be activated. So we had a chance to kind of take the best practices and leverage them and build kind of a unified practice. And then, of course, there was always, how do we message this? How do we brand this internally and externally? And then there was a component about how do we do a better job of meeting customer expectations? And so we built a whole customer engagement model and practice, and changed the way that at the time SAP engaged with customers.
That's spectacular. So a few different things. So you had tools, you had techniques, you had case studies, effectively showcases of what good looked like. And you had metrics, rules of thumb that said, okay, this is what we need to do, or we see success if 25% of whatever licenses are put into effect sooner than later, which I imagine isn't the same rule of thumb necessarily from one product type to another, but informed the creation of best practice rules of thumb. One last question, and then I want to move on to Citrix, because we could talk about all the work you did at SAP for a long time, because it's tremendous. Maybe two last questions, but so one of them is, beyond simply the mechanics and the capability set, you had to change or at least inform and enhance hearts and minds. You needed to educate a culture to make it very much focused on this. What were the steps that you took to create cultural awareness and change?
Yeah, very perceptive, because that was actually when I was appointed to that position. The thing that I said to the board was, if this is just about our customer success organization, we called it customer first. We branded it customer first, for internal reasons and external reasons. But if it's only about the customer success organization and we don't capture the hearts and minds of all 100,000 people at the company, we're going to fail. Right. Because customers, every employee, whether you're a back office employee or front office working directly with the customer, has to have a customer first mindset, right? So we built a brand, and we built kind of a transformation strategy on how we capture the hearts and minds. And we presented at leadership meetings across the company. We identified, stakeholders and change agents across the different functions. And that was paramount. And we were still going through that transformation. I said to the board that it would be a 5-year journey. And actually, because of some of the leadership changes that were made, we accelerated that journey quite a bit. And by two and a half years in, we had made really, really good progress on that transformational aspect.
Well, I imagine there are the folks who come to the family through acquisition, smaller, scrappier companies who depended very heavily on customer experience. But at the end of the day, SAP is SAP. It's the enterprise mainstay that most organizations use wall to wall. So I would assume some folks in the organization didn't necessarily feel like they needed to embrace experience as much, because who else are they going to use? They've been using us forever. So there were sort of different starting points across the organization for the customer first cultural push you made.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the last big acquisitions we made was Qualtrics, which we just spun back out in an IPO. Right. But that Qualtrics acquisition was great for us from a customer first perspective, because it was all about customer experience, brand experience, employee experience, and product experience. Right? They were kind of the 4 pillars. And so we drafted off of that tailwind a little bit, because that was the shiny new object. And we said, hey, it is customer experience. And yes, we do have the customer's customer, right? Our customer's customer. It's all about like understanding what are those moments that matter, and how do we make sure that we capture those moments and ultimately monetize them as much as possible. So, right. That was key. And the other one, you touched on this, Ian, yourself, is there were tools. One of the things we put in a customer success platform across the company, and that was fundamentally key too, because then we could respond to customers much more efficiently and effectively. And toward the end, we also built a digital customer success team as well to reach some of the smaller customers in our population.
Right. That's tremendous. And oftentimes platform is the mechanics of it, but it's also a sort of a unified vocabulary, if you will, so that everybody was speaking the same language. Yep. Okay, so let's now use that as a pivot point. So you now have a new role. Congratulations. Yep. It's relatively fresh and somewhat hot off the presses. You've been there a few months. So talk to us about the inspiration to move to Citrix, again, another large organization that is very much a mainstay of how enterprises run, and your role at Citrix.
Sure. So, at SAP, I started to think about how do I make a bigger impact, and I wanted to, and for the last few years, I kind of had this nudge and I think all of us have it at some point. Like, is there something else I should be doing or could be doing? And I've spent my life challenging myself, both in business and in my personal life, and I just felt like I needed a new challenge. I wanted a new challenge, and I was going to take the year off and ride my bike and my motorcycle and just kind of decompress for a while because I'd been working for 30 plus years straight. And I got a call from the CFO of Citrix, who I worked with at SAP. Our offices were right next to each other. And he goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, it's interesting you called. I'm just about ready to leave SAP. I'm going to take some time off." He goes, "Well, I've got an opportunity that you might want to consider." So we kind of laid out this chief innovation officer role. And he knew at the time, I didn't know, but he knew that there was going to be some acquisitions, at least one in the portfolio moving forward, and bringing maybe some of that customer success DNA and the innovation side of things with design thinking to Citrix. So I said, "Yeah, okay. Well, why don't we get together maybe in 6-9 months, and we'll talk then." He's like, "No." He goes, "I need someone now. So either take it, you either take it now, or I'm going to move on." So I was like, "All right." So I took a month off, and I went to work at Citrix. And my perception of Citrix was one of basically a plumbing and network company, because that's how my previous company used Citrix. But it's been amazing to see kind of all the different things that Citrix does. And then when you factor in kind of the changes that have happened across the globe with the pandemic and everything else, it's truly exciting to be at a company like Citrix that focuses on, basically the future of work.
Right. Right.
So it's been fun so far.
Absolutely. So I can't move on without commenting that the break you were going to take both shows off that you're cooler than me and in better shape with both a motorcycle and a bike. So thanks for that. That's cool. And I'll tell you, so Citrix, I have a somewhat strong association or connotation of Citrix too. And we talked about this before we went live, which is in the outsourcing space, which I've spent much of my career in. I don't think the industry would exist if not for Citrix. I think so much of what enabled us to move data, to open up access to applications for teams of passionate, capable people all over the planet wouldn't have been possible if not for Citrix. It effectively was one of the major levers that made for a the world is flat kind of concept to even exist. And so for that, I mean, that's the role Citrix in my head plays. Whether it's plumbing or whether it's higher order or not. But so to take us a bit more through your sort of the I guess the early stages of getting to know your new home. What does Citrix represent? I mean, you said everyone's home now, so we're virtualized by necessity at this point. But what other role is Citrix playing that was an interesting finding for you?
Yeah, I think the one is the transition to the cloud, right? Citrix is working with our customers to transition them to the cloud. And that's important, right? I mean, the cost of compute has come way down. You see the rise of Microsoft, AWS, and Google in terms of hyperscalers and what they can offer to clients. And we play a critical role in the customer's migration to the cloud, especially when they're migrating off of their own data centers, et cetera. So one of the elements is around the networking, right, and making sure that we provide all the capability to migrate them and have that same seamless experience, whether it's in the data center or it's now in the cloud. So, application delivery controllers, so that actually the speed and the user experience is the same, if not better, in the cloud than on-prem, for example. That's one area. Another area is security. And if you think about let's just take the last month, Ian, right? In terms of the different security breaks and breaches that have happened, whether it's the government institutions or it was, you know, the Outlook mail breach, or now in the last couple of days, there was the, you know, the video tech company that was hacked, and they accessed all kinds of videos. Security is becoming a bigger and bigger concern to CIOs and CEOs, quite honestly, and the boards. And you see what happens to company stock when they do have a security breach. So, you know, that's an important element. And Citrix has a really great security profile and portfolio where, you know, we can help the companies make sure that when employees are accessing their desktops virtually, right? Virtualization is Citrix's bread and butter. But when they're accessing applications, whether they're on-prem applications that are now virtualized or they're cloud SaaS applications, they have the same experience, but they have the security, right, to make sure that, you know, everything is safe, and, you know, we minimize it. We call it zero trust, right? You can't assume, you can't trust. Right. So zero trust is what Citrix security is all about as well. And then the third element is workplace. And so, you know, in this work from home environment, how do we make sure that that seamless experience, that user experience, is as easy and comfortable as possible with all these remote workers? So we have the capability of bringing in on-premise applications, SaaS applications, and, you know, making that experience holistic and seamless. Again, obviously very secure. But then we can also create micro apps. So, like the Department of Transportation in Ohio, you know, when this whole pandemic hit, they basically had 3 days to make sure that employees, remote employees, and contractors, you know, had that experience. And actually, one of the things they didn't think about was, you know, when they were creating their systems, is giving contractors access. And so we were able to do that. But you know, the CIO for the state of Ohio will tell you that was 6 years in planning. Like they've been thinking about, you know, how do we virtualize our applications? How do we make sure that they're secure, etc. So there was a lot of thought that had gone into that. But in 3 days, they were able to turn on the switch. Right? So that whole workspace and simplifying that workspace, creating an ease of use, is also an important element of it. So, I mean, it's simply amazing. And then, you know, the last piece is through an acquisition we just recently made, and that's all about collaboration. Right. So how do we make it easier for employees to collaborate, whether they're in a specific functional area like marketing or IT, or they're in a project management area, or, you know, across functional areas within an enterprise. And that fits really well with our workspace, right? With Citrix Workspace, because we introduce collaboration capabilities within the workspace itself.
Perfect. So I want to get there, but before we do, the distinction in my mind is, and I'll go back to some of the comments you made around security, and then everyone being virtual and at home out of often necessity and safety. There's a lot of people who talk about new normal, and the new normal that this pandemic has accelerated to some degree. I distinguish between new normal and better normal, and I think some of that better normal, in some cases, as you said, with the auto group, which is they've been planning this for quite a while. And so we have anticipated and are working towards some sort of roadmap to achieve better normalcy, you know, more resilient in the cloud, faster, easier, simpler. And a pandemic just was a kick in the pants to accelerate and hurry up in a lot of cases. And if done well, it is making things better. And it just so happens that apparently with the capabilities like Citrix affords, people have moved into that better normal faster. And then there's new normal, which isn't necessarily better, and that covers some of what's happening around these cyber events, and it's becoming all too common, as I totally agree and know, and so enterprises need to be just that much more resilient, have zero trust, as you say, and harden absolutely everything, because this is unfortunately a new normal that is in fact not better. It's the worst normal, which is going to constrain, constrict, and cripple enterprises globally, and it's seeming to do that on a way too frequent basis these days. So let's get to, so you'd hinted at, so you acquired Rike recently. And Rike is a collaboration platform. It just so happens to be the tool that my marketing team uses globally to coordinate and do my bidding.
Thank you for being a customer.
Yeah, exactly. No, this is it's what keeps them unified and coordinated and probably moving forward in spite of whatever chaotic things I say on planning calls. So it's like the anti-me, it's structure stuff. And as you said, it enables collaboration, which really is a common theme throughout much of what you've done both at SAP and at Citrix. Now I think of it as a lot of collaboration internally. It's my team that collaborates, but you have spent a lot of time collaborating all the way back from Conrail, where you were working with auto manufacturers on how to do what they were doing better, all the way forward to the work you're doing integrating Rike as an opportunity to help people collaborate.
Yep.
Is that the future? More seamless collaboration, both internally and amongst peers and business partners?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the pandemic was actually a catalyst.
Yeah.
Right. It was a catalyst for a lot of things. I remember one of the tech CEOs, it might have been Intel or I can't remember, but basically said, how can we accomplish so much in such a little bit of time, right, when we have to?
Yeah.
And he was right. And so, I think that there's definitely going to be much more of a focus on collaboration. I saw an article in Fortune, I think last week, that talked about, they did a survey on how many, on employees and how many expected to, or how many desired to work from home,
right,
versus, go back to the office, versus hybrid. And, there was a large propensity of that surveyed population that said, we don't want to go back to the office full time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to work from home full time. But this hybrid thing seems to make the most sense to us. So, right. and I believe that is the direction we're gonna have to work in a hybrid world from now on. I think the catalyst, the pandemic has been a catalyst for that kind of change, and because of that change, and in a hybrid world, collaboration becomes paramount. Right? You have to, and it's. Let's face it, collaboration isn't easy when you're not sitting in a conference room doing a design thinking session and everybody's there and they're all looking at flip charts, or you have breakout sessions and you come back. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did a design thinking session here at Citrix back in January, and it was hard, right? It's hard to do that when you're all virtual, right. And have virtual breakout sessions and all come back to the meeting, right? And so I truly believe that collaboration is going to be absolutely key moving forward.
Well, and I, again, to allude back to some other things throughout your career, as far as a mindset change, culture evolution through academy or what have you, because what's even harder than a collaborative design thinking session where you're all virtual is one in which half of you are virtual.
Yes.
And so if we move back to this hybrid, unless we time our hybrids so we're all in on Tuesday and Thursday, you've got which will probably be very difficult because, my kids have soccer on Wednesday. And so I'd really like to be home for that. And so your kids have soccer on Tuesday? Huh. Well, so there's some real niceties that came from discovering that we could all be at home. And for those of us who've been lucky enough to maintain jobs, it's hit others quite hard. But so for those who have seen a virtual can work for them, the hybridization or return to some form of normalcy, so we can at least see one another again, which would be a very nice thing for us as social animals.
Yes.
But then the complexity, as you said, even from a cloud to on-prem thing, to have your people in the cloud-ish to on-prem all of a sudden, that takes a lot of technical and platform sophistication, and cultural sophistication, and just skill and social contract sophistication to coordinate seamlessly. Otherwise, fast forward a year and we'll decide that it was a nice experiment, but man, it didn't work. We're all back in the office now.
Yeah, you're so spot on. I mean, it's it's a combination of things, right? It's in that hybrid world, you've got to be closer to your employees than ever. Because and actually we just our CHRO, our human resource officer, came out with a survey today for Citrix, right? Like, what are your expectations for back to the office, and how are things going? Like a pulse check, right? All those things are going to make a big difference when at least some percentage of the population returns back to the office,
Right.
And making sure that user experience, that employee experience, is something that they want to do. And you think about it, in this era of a war for talent as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big deal that companies are going to have to get this return to work thing right, and also think about all the different complexities and how you manage kind of reopening offices, et cetera. You're absolutely right, Ian.
Oh, it's going to be a minefield, and I'll go back to the office. I'll refuse to wear shoes while I'm there.
I told my wife, I said, I don't mind traveling here and there, but I mean, I traveled a ton, especially internationally, my last role. And I was like, I'm not doing that again. I'm going to travel, but I'm going to travel, when it's prudent to do so.
Right. That was me. That was me too. I haven't been on a plane in over a year. It's the weirdest thing. My entire career, I used to travel hundreds of thousands of miles a year, and now I don't know where my luggage is. It's
right. I don't either.
Yeah.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, granted, my wife has to put up with me a whole lot more, so she's probably looking forward to me traveling at least a little bit. But okay, so have we covered everything that falls under the remit of your new role? Right, customer innovation it speaks to so much, because it touches on customer and awareness and empathy and experience, and it also touches on pushing envelope, I would imagine, collaboratively and helping them innovate, as well as innovating on behalf of them. What else falls within that role? Because it's a very cool one, and I want it too.
Yeah. So I have responsibility for our cloud strategy partners. So Google, AWS, Microsoft, et cetera. So that's part of it. And then the other part of my remit, when we acquired Rike, I co-lead the go-to-market integration for Rike into Citrix as well, which is, that's as you know, when you do it, you were part of an integration yourself, right? So you know what that's like, and you've got to be thoughtful on how you do that.
Right. Well, but as you alluded in the SAP discussions too, you learn quite a bit from it, because you're getting to reflect on two different cultures that have come to be who they are through their own heritage. So there's some cross-pollination that might result as well. Yeah. And can't imagine a better shepherd of that integration than somebody who's seen so much of it and brought those best practices together. So that's very cool. So I'll two different things. I will do some housekeeping, which I'm remiss to have kept till the very end, but I want to thank those who've joined and shared their names. If you haven't yet, please do, because Mary, David, Donald from South Africa, thank you for joining. Shay from Boston, Vince from South Florida, which isn't as far. Thanks, Vince. AJ from Indianapolis. Farhad, thanks for joining. Really appreciate that, guys. If you do have questions, you can post them now, or you can put them in the feed, and we'll see them after the show as well, and then try our best to respond to them. So with that, Marty, I'll leave the last word to you as far as the future of work-life culture, collaboration, innovation, experience, cloudification, virtualization. Where do you expect to see things going with the culmination of all this great capability and awareness, and even, I mean, you mentioned several times design thinking. I mean, that approach is so powerful to make us really think outside of boxes and outside of ourselves. What do you think the future holds for re-entry into a hybrid of both new and better normal realities?
Ian, I think we're just scratching the surface on future of work. I really do. I think the pandemic kind of forced, everyone to think about work and how we work, where we work, why we work, and making sure that, we think about the experience of employees vastly differently than we did, a year and a half ago. And so, when you think about the role that technology can play in the future of work, whether it's, having multiple cameras on your PC like we're in this chat now, and if my eyes move, the camera will take it, right? Or improving the sound quality. So if I make, a sound in a design thinking session, it's picked up as if I'm in that room. Or, basically thinking about the collaboration tools and capabilities, and how do we make that design thinking session much more intuitive and easy going forward as we're driving innovation for the company, and how do we accelerate digital transformation across not just the workspace but really across the enterprise, and what are those priorities to make sure that we drive the best customer experience, the best employee experience, the best partner experience, and ultimately the stakeholders win in that environment.
Well, that sums it up beautifully. Marty, thank you so much for spending your time with us and the listeners of OneTAKE. I'm sorry you didn't get to spend more time on your motorcycle and bicycle, but it sounds like you found a tremendous alternative outlet where you really are helping shape the future of work. And with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining. I hope you're all healthy and safe, and tune in next time for another episode of OneTAKE Live. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.